Hello everyone, my name is John, aka Javon Graves, and welcome to the very first episode of The History Machine. It's kind of like the Mystery Machine from Scooby-Doo, where instead of solving mysteries in a van with a bunch of random people and an anthropomorphic dog, it's just me sitting by myself, talking to a microphone about random historical facts.
Near, far away.
Stale memes aside, this channel's goal is to educate people about major historical events that have taken place all throughout history, but in a fun and entertaining fashion. Think of it like a blended mix between John Green's Crash Course World History, Geography Now, and, I don't know, Pyrocynical. Anyways, with all that being said, let's dig into the very first topic that we'll be covering in this channel, which is the Spanish Civil War. Roll the intro. So the Spanish Civil War was one of the bloodiest conflicts that has ever taken place in human history, and it has served as the lead up to none other than World War II. You could tell just how bad it was by looking at Pablo Picasso's famous painting Guernica, which was made as a response to the bombing of the Basque village of Guernica in 1937. I mean, just by looking at it alone, you can already see just how terrible this war was. It was that bad. Now you may be asking yourself, okay, so if it's that bad, then what could have caused it all to go down in the first place? Well, let's look right into it by entering the first, yet creatively named segment I'd like to call Background Information. So when you're talking about the domestic politics of Spain between 1812 and 1939, it's safe to say that it can only be described as a complete, total mess. Almost like the typical comment section of every commentary channel that you see here on YouTube. Ever since the Spanish Constitution of 1812 was created by the Cadiz Cortes, which was Spain's first sovereign legislative assembly, there was an ongoing tension between the Spanish monarchy and small L liberals over who would run the country. Between the years 1814 and 1874, 12 coups had taken place. As a result of the numerous uprisings that had taken place during this period, it led to the overthrow of Queen Isabel II of the House Bourbon in 1868. A few years afterwards, in 1873, Isabella's replacement, King Amadeo I, abdicated and the First Spanish Republic was claimed. It didn't last that long, however, as in 1874 the Bourbons were restored to power yet again. Groups like the anarchists and Carlists were strongly opposed to the restoration, and the idea of republicanism began to take a firmer hold in Spain. Fast forward a couple decades, and things were slowly and steadily becoming worse. In 1909, the tragic week occurred, in which the Spanish military clashed with working-class citizens who were backed by anarchists, socialists, and republicans in Barcelona and through most of Catalonia. In 1923, a military coup took place, causing Spain to become a military dictatorship until 1931, in which afterwards King Alfonso XIII, who was already very unpopular amongst urban Spaniards, called for elections to take place. As a result of the elections, socialists and liberal Republicans won in a landslide victory, causing King Alfonso to go into exile to Rome. 2 days after the election, on April 14, 1931, the Second Spanish Republic was proclaimed, and Niceto Alcalá Zamora became president and head of state. Initially, things were going pretty smoothly for the Republic, as almost all parts of Spanish society supported the new government. However, as you might have already expected, things were becoming undone yet again. Early on, violent incidents happened, in which a taxi driver was attacked outside a monarchist club in Madrid, and violent strikes caused by the Confederación Nacional de Trabajo, otherwise known as the CNT, in Seville. Even more so, in January of 1933, the Casas Viejas massacre took place, in which after 2 guards became wounded during a CNT protest in the village of Casa Viejas on the southern tip of Spain, the civil guard burned down a house with many people inside of it, all of whom were anarchists and their families. Now, seeing as though several right-wing political groups like CETA and the Falange were forming, as well as believing that they were going to have their rear ends handed to them on a silver platter during the 1936 elections, the left-wing political parties all united to form a Popular Front alliance. By doing so, the Popular Front narrowly won the election, with Manuel Azaña Diaz forming the government and later replacing Zamora as president. While the left took a sigh of relief, the right was, to put it lightly, furious, especially considering that many prominent generals in the military did not support the Popular Front. There were fears within the government that a potential military coup could take place, so the government did all they could to remove any generals they suspected as conspirators from their posts, including General Francisco Franco, who went from chief of staff to the military commander of the Canary Islands. Franco, along with Generals Jose Sanjurjo and Emilio Mola, were the main conspirators for what would officially start the Civil War in the first place, the coup of January 1936. Starting in Spanish Morocco on July 17th at 5 in the morning, the rebels, who were dubbed the Nationalists by Joseph Goebbels a week later, took control of the northern territories of Old Castile and Leon, as well as the cities of Seville, Cordoba, Granada, and Oviedo. Even though the government stated that only Spanish Morocco was the only territory taken by the rebels, and that the general population shouldn't take arms, groups like the CNT nonetheless took up arms and took to fighting against the rebels in a very YOLO-type fashion. And just like that, the Spanish Civil War had begun. Now, before I get into how it all went down, which, funny enough, is what the next segment is called, it's important to break down each side of the Civil War and find out which countries supported each faction, as the Spanish Civil War proved very much to be a proxy war leading up to World War II, with fascist governments supporting the nationalists and democracies and communist states supporting the pro-government Republicans. On the side of the nationalists, Germany and Italy provided a lot of military assistance, not only in terms of manpower and logistical support, but also with the use of tanks and other vehicles of war. The German Kriegsmarine and Italian Regina Marina assisted the nationalists at sea, while the German Condor Legion and the Italian Corps volunteer troops fought on the land. Portugal also provided ammunition and logistical support, as well as a group of 20,000 volunteer troops called the Viriatos. For the Republicans, the Soviet Union was its largest ally. Unlike the Germans and the Italians, the Soviets brought the Republicans their supplies on the down low, covertly supplying the Republicans with up to 806 planes, 362 tanks, and 1,895 artillery pieces. The Soviets also supplied military advisors as well as soldiers to help assist in operating the tanks. Even though they didn't supply any soldiers or vehicles or whatnot, Mexico did send $2 million in financial aid to the Republicans, as well as 20,000 rifles and 20 million ammo cartridges, as well as taking in up to 50,000 Spanish refugees who then resided in Mexico City and Morelia. Both sides also had various volunteers from several other countries, with the most famous one being the pro-Republican International Brigades. Now that all of that has gotten out of the way, let's dig into how it all went down. So here's how it all went down. 2 days after the initial nationalist uprising in Morocco, as well as the ordering of the assassination of his own nephew who sided with the Republicans, Franco flew from the Canary Islands to Morocco in order to take full command of his forces in Africa. 2 days after that, on July 21st, the Nationalists took control of the naval base located in Ferrol, Galicia. From that point, the Nationalists were able to successfully push all the way to the French border after winning the Battle of Irun. With a massive air and sea lift provided by Germany and Italy to the Nationalists in Africa, the Nationalists were on the offensive and were taking a lot of territory from the Republicans. The Republicans were finally able to get their act together on November 23rd, in which they were able to protect the city of Madrid from the Nationalists with the help of the Republican 5th Regiment as well as the International Brigades. From that point on, Franco's forces laid siege to Madrid for the next 3 years, while the Republican government relocated to Valencia in order to have themselves be protected from the violence. Even though the Republicans were able to defend Madrid, they were pretty much getting #wrecked throughout most of 1937. With the exception of the Battle of Guadalajara, which was practically the largest victory for the Republic throughout the entire war, the Nationalists won the battles of Malaga and Jarama, as well as taking control of the Basque Country, which was especially controversial due to the vicious bombing of Guernica by the German Condor Legion, which, as we all know from what I said earlier, the Guernica. But back to the war, the constant defeats taken by the Republicans came to a head in what was called the May Days, in which infighting occurred between the Republicans and the CNT in Barcelona and all throughout Catalonia. After the events in Barcelona subsided, the government attempted a series of counterattacks to reclaim some of its lost territory, although they ended up losing it all in their attempts. Franco's forces continued their advances in 1938. With the assistance from German and Italian fighters, Franco's forces defeated the Republicans in the Battle of Teruel. After launching the Aragon offensive on March 7th and reaching the Mediterranean on April 14th, the Republicans tried to reach a peace agreement with the Nationalists. However, Franco was adamant that they only accept unconditional surrender. Considering that was the only term that Franco would accept, fighting obviously still continued, with a new nationalist offensive trying to take over Valencia. However, the Republicans were actually able to defend the city with a series of trenches called the XYZ line, which prevented the nationalists from taking any other territory in that area. With the nationalists halted in their tracks, the Republicans tried one last-ditch effort in order to try to regain territory. However, they were defeated at the Battle of the Ebro. To add insult to injury, the Munich Agreement took place between Britain, France, and Germany during the same time, but we will talk about that story in a different time. 1939 would be the year that the Nationalists finally end up beating the Republicans. After capturing Catalonia, France and Britain took the L and recognized the Nationalists as the legitimate government of Spain. Chaos erupted in Madrid as communist volunteers turned their backs against the Republicans and tried to make peace with the Nationalists. However, Franco stuck with his guns and only demanded unconditional surrender. On March 28th, the Nationalists finally took control of Madrid, and on the 31st, all of Spain was under Nationalist control. Franco officially declared victory on April 1st, 1939. Even though the war came to an end, the violence did not end there, as Franco's new regime imprisoned thousands of people who collaborated with the Republican regime and executed up to 30,000 people. Most of those who escaped went to France to seek refuge. However, once the Vichy regime came to power, a lot of those people either returned to Spain and underwent quote-unquote purification, or were deported to Germany, where 50,000 Spaniards died in the Mauthausen concentration camp. Ultimately, the last remaining shreds of the Second Republic established a government in exile in Mexico, while the Spanish Marquis engaged in guerrilla warfare against Franco's regime until at least the 1960s. The Republican government in exile finally dissolved in Paris, France in 1977, when democracy finally came back to Spain and the Francoist regime ended. Now look, I'll be honest with you guys. I did not expect this channel to start off with such a dark chapter in history. The Spanish Civil War was one of the bloodiest conflicts in human history, with approximately 230,000 people dying in the process, with the Nationalist White Terror accounting for a majority of that count, while the Republican Red Terror still caused significant death. With so much bloodshed, it is astounding to know that was practically only the beginning, with World War II just around the corner. Either way, I hope you all learned something from this. If, when you were watching this video, you thought to yourself,
"Hey, that's pretty good,"
then go on ahead and click the like button and subscribe as well. I'll see you all in the next video.